Jonas Salk. I closed the laboratory when I realized this one simple fact about health. He was the man who gave the world a new shot at freedom, eradicating a terrifying disease that once paralyzed children and haunted communities. Yet for all the accolades, Jonas Salk carried something deeper than scientific achievement, a philosophy about health that transcended the lab walls. In this story, we will follow the remarkable journey of the polio vaccine pioneer, see how he reached the pinnacle of medical history, and discover the single illuminating fact that led him to close his laboratory doors. By the end of this narrative, you may find yourself rethinking your entire approach to well-being. Jonas Salk was born in New York City in 1914, the son of modest immigrants who placed high value on education. From an early age, he was fascinated by nature, devouring books on biology and the human body. School teachers noticed his relentless curiosity. While other children might lose patience with the dryness of textbooks, Jonas seemed intent on uncovering every mystery hidden in those pages. By the time he reached high school, he had already resolved to do something with his life that would benefit humanity. He began his undergraduate work at the College of the City of New York, then moved on to New York University School of Medicine. It was there that he gravitated toward research on viruses. Polio was a dreaded disease at the time, striking fear into parents and children alike. Each summer, outbreaks would send families into a panic, closing swimming pools, keeping kids from playgrounds, and leaving neighborhoods in a state of dread. The disease attacked the nervous system, leading to paralysis or even death in severe cases. Those who survived often faced life in leg braces or iron lungs. Salk, seeing the devastation polio caused, resolved to devote himself to developing a vaccine. After his residency, he joined Thomas Francis Jr. at the University of Michigan, working on influenza vaccines. That experience honed his skills in virology and vaccine development. But polio, with its heartbreaking impact on children, remained the true calling that loomed in his future. At the University of Pittsburgh, he established his own lab, focusing on a potential killed virus vaccine. A controversial approach, since many scientists believed only live-attenuated viruses could confer immunity. Salk disagreed. His method involved taking samples of the polio virus and rendering them unable to replicate, yet preserving enough structure for the immune system to recognize and develop antibodies. By 1955, after large-scale field trials involving over 1 million children, the polio pioneers, the vaccine was declared a success. Pandemonium erupted in the best way possible. Salk became a hero overnight, credited with potentially saving generations of children from paralysis. Yet despite his fame, Salk insisted that the vaccine was the result of collaboration and the scientific process, not a single man's genius. When asked why he never patented the vaccine, he famously retorted, "Could you patent the sun?" It was an emblematic statement. Jonas Salk believed that knowledge, especially something as vital as a life-saving vaccine, belonged to humanity. That selflessness earned him respect far beyond scientific circles. In the years following the polio vaccine success, Salk continued researching. He founded the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in La Jolla, California, a place dedicated to unraveling the most intricate mysteries of biology. The architecture alone was symbolic: open courtyards, vistas of the Pacific Ocean, and spacious labs that encourage collaboration and the free flow of ideas. From the outside, it seemed like the perfect environment for relentless discovery. But behind the scenes, Salk's perspective on health was evolving. Early in his career, he viewed health as something that primarily resided in the laboratory. Solutions came from petri dishes, electron microscopes, and the careful manipulation of viruses. Over time, however, he began to see that health was more than the absence of disease. It was a state of balance, resilience, and harmony between the individual and the environment. He began noticing how stress and emotional well-being seemed to affect how people responded to illnesses. Observing the dedicated researchers in his lab, he saw them push their bodies and minds to the brink, often ignoring the signals that something was off. Some colleagues fell ill from overwork, succumbing to ailments that were not strictly about pathogens. Salk reflected on these patterns, remembering how polio outbreaks were often worse during summertime, when children's routines shifted, or how other societal factors seemed to correlate with disease prevalence. This line of thought led him to question traditional assumptions. Could the environment, not just the physical environment, but the social and emotional environment, be as critical to health as any microbe or vaccine? He studied epidemiological data, read cross-cultural research, and even dabbled in psychology. As the 1960s transitioned into the 1970s, a growing counterculture pushed for holistic perspectives on health. Salk found himself surprisingly aligned with some of these ideas, even if he approached them with a scientist's rigor. Despite all this introspection, he continued to work within the conventional framework of laboratory research, investigating new vaccines and interventions. Years of routine had taught him that the lab was where breakthroughs happened. But the more he investigated the interplay between mind, body, and community, the more he felt that something was missing. He traveled, spoke at conferences, and conversed with health experts from various traditions, sometimes encountering doctors who integrated meditation or dietary changes into their treatments, sometimes hearing from anthropologists who linked disease patterns to social disconnection. A theme emerged. Perhaps the single most pivotal factor in health was empowerment. People needed to realize that health was not simply bestowed by doctors. It was cultivated through lifestyle, mindset, and meaningful connections. One pivotal moment occurred when he visited a small rural community that had famously low rates of heart disease. Expecting to find some unique genetic factor, he instead discovered that the community's members supported each other in countless ways. Neighbors shared meals, had frequent gatherings, and rarely let anyone slip into isolation. Stress levels were comparatively low, not because the residents had easy lives, but because they tackled hardships together. Salk was struck by how intangible social dynamics could translate into tangible health outcomes. He returned to his institute with a buzzing mind, rethinking every assumption. While other virologists remained focused on molecules and pathogens, Salk felt driven to explore a broader vision of health. Despite his reputation, he found himself uneasy in lab meetings. The solutions they pursued were remarkable, but seemed incomplete. He started confiding in close collaborators, discussing how many diseases stemmed from lifestyle factors like chronic stress, social disconnection, and poor diet. He suggested that the next major health breakthrough might not be a vaccine, but a shift in how society conceptualized well-being. Some colleagues found these ideas compelling, while others dismissed them as too amorphous, unscientific, or beyond the scope of their research. Nonetheless, Salk could not shake the feeling that the greatest potential for reducing human suffering lay in this broader approach. Now, here is a point for each of us to pause and consider. How often do we look for quick fixes, medication, vaccines, or external interventions, while ignoring the deeper roots of our health challenges? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments if you have ever experienced a situation where community support or emotional well-being played a bigger role in healing than you initially expected. Over time, Salk felt called to step away from daily lab operations to think more broadly. He believed his mission was expanding, not to diminish the value of laboratory science, but to integrate it with a more holistic understanding of human life. The question that consumed him was how to encourage people to recognize their own agency in health matters. Vaccines can stop viruses, but they cannot cure loneliness. Antibiotics can kill bacteria, but they cannot mend a society fractured by stress and isolation. His reading took him into philosophy, Eastern medical traditions, and psychology. He was fascinated by how certain cultures seemed to maintain robust health without advanced medical technology. He examined diets rich in whole foods, communal living arrangements, and spiritual practices. Although still a man of science, he began to see that intangible qualities, a sense of purpose, belonging, mental calm, contributed immensely to disease prevention. Around this time, the seeds of a radical decision began to form in his mind. Many of his peers were pushing to expand the Salk Institute, to develop new labs, and to secure more grants. Funding agencies poured money into research that promised tangible results. But Jonas Salk was drifting toward a place where intangible results mattered just as much. He realized that if he continued leading laboratory projects, he might never fully explore the more holistic dimensions of health that had captured his attention. He wrestled with the decision. After all, he was Jonas Salk, a name recognized worldwide. People expected him to churn out new vaccines and treatments. The idea of closing a lab even temporarily felt like professional suicide. Would his colleagues see him as having lost his scientific edge? Would the public, which still revered him as a hero, think he had gone off the deep end? Doubt not at him. Yet, the evidence of stress-induced ailments and the power of social and emotional factors remained undeniable. Salk recalled how, during the polio epidemic, fear and uncertainty exacerbated the public's sense of vulnerability. Overcoming polio required not just the vaccine, but also a collective sense of relief, hope, and trust. Communities united to vaccinate their children. A spirit of cooperation reigned. Maybe that communal aspect, that trust and unity, was as critical to polio's defeat as any medical milestone. In the midst of this internal turmoil, Salk experienced a personal health scare. Exhaustion, unexplained pains, and unrelenting headaches plagued him for weeks. Doctors advised rest, but life at the institute was unrelenting. Meetings, grant proposals, lab oversight, his schedule left little room to breathe. The very pressures he had been studying began to weigh on him directly, and it dawned on him that he was ignoring the counsel he so passionately shared with others. One night, while lying awake, he had a moment of clarity. He realized that the root cause of his ailments was not a virus or a bacterium. It was stress, lifestyle imbalance, a relentless schedule that ignored the body's signals. In essence, he himself had become the quintessential example of the person who depends on external interventions while neglecting inner needs. That realization shook him to his core. Within days, he made the decision that stunned his colleagues. He would step away from running the lab. He began delegating tasks to trusted associates. Some tried to talk him out of it, pointing to valuable research in progress. But Salk argued that if he continued pushing in the same direction, he would be betraying the deeper understanding he had gained. He wanted to devote his energy to writing, lecturing, and forming a new blueprint for health that integrated scientific rigor with the wisdom of holistic thinking. At a press conference, he announced he was closing the laboratory, at least in the sense of stepping back from daily lab responsibilities. Journalists were puzzled, expecting perhaps a big revelation about a new vaccine or medical technique. Instead, Salk described how modern society was ignoring the simple fact that health begins not in test tubes, but in our everyday choices, relationships, and environment. We have countless vaccines and medicines, he said, but we have forgotten how to live in harmony with ourselves and each other. The remark drew mixed reactions. Some in the media accused him of going soft, while a subset of the public cheered his vision of a holistic future. One editorial questioned whether Jonas Salk was throwing away his genius by wading into the murky waters of social well-being. Salk replied that all his years in virology had led him to see a bigger picture. "I am not abandoning science," he insisted. "I am broadening its horizon." Over the subsequent months, Salk immersed himself in collaborations with psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists, exploring how communities could foster health at all levels. He looked at how city planning affected social cohesion, how schools could teach emotional intelligence, and how workplace environments could be redesigned for better mental health. It was an ambitious agenda, and he had no illusions that it would be easy to implement. However, he believed it was the natural evolution of his life's work. The immediate question that critics posed was this: how, precisely, does one measure the impact of such intangible factors as community spirit or emotional well-being? Salk admitted the difficulty, but insisted that new metrics could be developed. Just as scientists once had to invent methods to measure viruses, so could they pioneer ways to assess social health. He cited preliminary studies showing that people in supportive communities had fewer stress-related illnesses, faster recovery times, and longer lifespans, even when controlling for economic status. Now, pause again to reflect. Have you ever witnessed a situation where a supportive environment or a strong sense of purpose seemed to prevent or mitigate health issues? Or conversely, have you seen stress and social isolation tip someone into illness? You can share your insights in the comments. This is the kind of collective dialogue Jonas Salk longed for, a widespread recognition that health is not a static condition, but a dynamic interplay between individuals and their surroundings. As Salk continued on this new path, he wrote about what he called the single simple fact about health, that it is as much a product of mind, society, and spirit as it is of biology. In various lectures, he used metaphors that had once exclusively described viruses and applied them to social issues. Loneliness, he said, spreads like an epidemic. Distrust and hostility can become contagious within communities. The antidotes were empathy, connection, and collective responsibility. Eventually, Salk acknowledged that this revelation did not require him to literally shut down all scientific endeavors. His institute continued thriving, producing groundbreaking research in genetics, neuroscience, and more. However, the shift in Salk's personal focus was undeniable. He no longer believed that the next major leap in human health would come solely from a laboratory. Instead, he foresaw a future in which science and society joined forces to create conditions in which humans could flourish mentally, emotionally, and physically. Some of his associates, once skeptical, began to soften their stance. They saw parallels between Salk's approach and emerging fields like psychoneuroimmunology, which studied how mental states could influence immune function. Around the same time, epidemiologists began identifying blue zones, regions of the world where people lived unusually long, healthy lives. Many of these places shared strong community bonds, a sense of purpose, and daily rituals that integrated movement and rest. The synergy of evidence was growing, validating many of Salk's arguments. With renewed confidence, he spent the latter part of his life lecturing widely, challenging policymakers to invest in community health initiatives, school programs that foster resilience, and urban designs that cultivate interpersonal interactions. He believed that an informed, connected population would develop a form of collective immunity against not just infectious diseases, but against despair, isolation, and hopelessness. Even with these holistic convictions, Jonas Salk never downplayed the significance of vaccines and medical interventions. He remained proud of the polio vaccine's life-saving record. However, he felt compelled to add another dimension. The idea that no matter how many diseases we conquer, if people continue to lead unbalanced lives devoid of social support, new crises will emerge. We see it now in chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, often linked to lifestyle. Salk's argument was that the real laboratory we must learn to master is everyday life itself. He passed away in 1995, leaving behind a rich legacy of medical triumph and humanistic insight. The Salk Institute remains a beacon of scientific research, but perhaps the greatest testament to Jonas Salk's journey is the growing global movement toward integrative health. Conversations about gut-brain connections, the influence of chronic stress on immunity, and the role of social cohesion in preventing disease are now commonplace in many medical fields. In recent decades, studies have shown that people who experience high levels of loneliness and social isolation are more prone to a range of health issues, from depression to heart disease. Salk might have viewed these findings as validation of the direction he pursued in his final years. Indeed, the data suggests that while vaccines and medications are crucial for tackling infections and acute conditions, the everyday well-being of a population also hinges on factors like community ties, mental balance, and a sense of belonging. That is the core of the one simple fact about health that Salk realized. If you want to sustain true well-being in the long term, you have to look beyond pathogens and white blood cells. You have to examine relationships, purpose, environment, and emotional landscapes. If you neglect these dimensions, you may close the door on deeper healing, no matter how advanced your medical interventions are. By stepping away from the lab, Salk symbolically demonstrated that a purely reductionist approach to health was insufficient. Though it was a bold and controversial move, it echoed his broader life mission: to serve humanity, not just by preventing a specific disease, but by inspiring a holistic shift in how we think about ourselves and each other. Some have tried to distill Salk's revelation into handy formulas: eat well, stay connected, manage stress, move your body, find purpose, etc. But Salk's message was less about checking boxes and more about adopting a new lens through which to see health. He was adamant that this lens be grounded in scientific inquiry, meaning that we continue to research and refine our understanding of how social, emotional, and biological factors intertwine. Now, as we near the final moments of this journey, consider one last question. If you were to close your own laboratory of busyness, stress, or single-minded focus for a moment, what underlying aspect of your life's balance would you like to address first? Reflect on your environment, your sense of community, or even your emotional state. Which area do you believe is most in need of nurturing? That question embodies the heart of Jonas Salk's evolution. He did not abandon the lab to dismiss science. He did so to bring science into a larger conversation about what it means to be healthy. We stand at a time when mental health, social ties, and personal well-being are finally gaining the attention they deserve. Salk was among the pioneers who hinted at this broader horizon. In many ways, his decision to close the lab was a paradoxical step forward. By ceasing daily lab operations, he opened a gateway to a more expansive realm of health research. He opened the door for the rest of us to realize that, yes, conquering polio was a monumental milestone, but the next frontier might be unraveling the invisible webs that tie our mental, emotional, and social lives to our physical health. Ultimately, Jonas Salk's life reminds us that the seeds of innovation often sprout in unexpected places. The man who beat polio went on to champion a more profound kind of immunity, one that arises when science, society, and the human spirit work in harmony. That is the deeper legacy of Jonas Salk, hidden behind the well-known headlines of a triumphant vaccine. He showed us that the quest for health does not end with a needle in the arm. It continues in our homes, neighborhoods, workplaces, and hearts. And so, if you find yourself at a juncture where old habits no longer serve you, remember Salk's example. Sometimes, the bravest move is to close the door on what you know so that you can fully explore what you suspect might be even more important. In doing so, you might just discover your own simple fact about health that has been waiting all along. That piece of wisdom that makes everything else fall into place.